Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Navigating NewSpace, produced by the Matthew Isakowitz Fellowship Program. The MAT Fellowship is a highly selective summer internship and mentorship program, which helps to nurture the ethical exploration of the universe in the next generation of space leaders. Through candid conversations with our mentors, fellows, and affiliates, we hope to bring you some insight into the mechanisms of the rapidly evolving and changing world of NewSpace. My name is Shayna Hume, and I am the host for this segment and an alumni of the inaugural year of the Matthew Fellowship Program. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to one of our very own fellows, Anjali Roychowdhury. Anjali is a Stanford graduate who loves making cool things go really fast. As an underclassman, she led an optical communication cubesat project, which is now in orbit, and later in college, she co-founded a sounding rocket research project to break the Karman line. Professionally, she's worked in the autonomous vehicle space and in space, including working on the SpaceX Crew Dragon propulsion system. She is currently working at ABL Space Systems and loving it. In her free time, she loves running on the beach at sunset and sending photos, adorable pictures of her dog. Please welcome Anjali.
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much for that welcome.
Thank you so much for that biography. I feel like more people should tell us about whether their dog is on social media because that's a pretty important thing.
He actually isn't yet, but it's something that I know that my mom really wants to do. And when I was younger, I was oh, I don't want to be like that family, but I absolutely want to be that family. Hi, Mom. I know you're watching.
Oh, don't worry. My mom does the exact same thing. So to get us started, I know I just gave away some of the details, but could you just tell us a little bit about yourself for everyone who's listening?
Yeah, sure. So I have loved space for a long time. I did my undergrad at Stanford in mechanical engineering and also studied computer science. And then I'm in the middle of my graduate degree at Stanford in aerospace engineering. I've done a bunch of a really random assortment of things, largely because I think my approach has been find something exciting and go for it. And what excites me changes over time, which I think is normal. So I've worked on autonomous cars. I, as you said, worked on that CubeSat when I was a freshman. Worked on launching a rocket off of a balloon, which is about as much of a dynamics mess as it sounds like it is. And worked last summer at SpaceX, and this summer I'm an intern at ABL.
Wow, that sounds super exciting. To go back to the beginning, for starters, when did space become one of the things that excited you?
Yeah. So there's two answers to that question because I think it happened twice as a process. I think the first time was when I was younger. My parents would put on a lot of space and National Geographic and history documentaries, but the ones I really liked were the space ones. So I would watch them with my mom and dad and ask questions and was really interested in space when I was really little. And then I went through a lot of different things growing up. I really wanted to be a fashion designer for a while. And then I learned about genetics in school and was I'm going to be a genetics PhD. And then I got really into diplomacy and policy just because I thought they were really impactful ways to make a big difference in the world. And then at some point, my senior year of high school, an engineer from Blue Origin came to speak to our school, and she was related to my history teacher. And so I talked to her in more depth, just what do you work on? Why do you love what you do? And in talking with her, I kind of realized that working in aerospace and being able to build the future was equally impactful as a way to shape things, shape what our future looks like. And so I decided to try it by, I think basically at the end of my senior year, I'd applied to every college saying that I wanted to major in international relations. And then when I got to Stanford, I was I'm going to try mechanical engineering, and it stuck. And now we're here.
I have a very similar experience, except I almost did that with journalism. And I was might as well try aerospace engineering and see what happens.
Yeah.
By the way,
it's contagious. It's a strong bug.
I should mention, although I am so honored to have you as a guest today, there is a second guest coming on, and that is my cat, who you might hear in the background. He is very upset at the lack of attention, and so there will be
he's welcome to join.
Noise. If he could jump up on the desk right now, I know for a fact he would.
That's awesome.
So that person, that engineer in high school from Blue Origin, was that the very first time that you found out about commercial space, or did you know about it from an earlier age?
I think it was on my horizon for a while. I did robotics in middle school and high school, and I think especially, during high school, SpaceX started doing big launches somewhat regularly, and so that was like a notable event for us, was during robotics meetings or competitions or whatever. When I was with my like other engineering focused friends, I remember they would put SpaceX launches up on like the projector basically, and I thought it was super cool. I wasn't really thinking about it as a career, because I think growing up I thought of engineers as like very rigid and very like equation and formula oriented people, which like obviously are super important to engineering, but I never really saw myself in that. And so I didn't really think about it as a career. I thought about it as like a cool like global event that was happening.
That's so funny that you say that, because that is a perfect parallel for my own experience. I knew about it and I thought it was really cool, but very often I didn't picture myself in it. When did you start picturing yourself as an engineer and realizing that you were one?
Actually, with this conversation with this Blue Origin engineer in high school, I think I'd started to consider physics, because the first physics class I took was AP Physics, which is like kind of a 0 to 100 situation. But I really loved my physics teacher, Mr. Lortz, if you're out there, thank you. And so I started thinking about maybe trying like a physics minor or something. And I was talking to Erica, who still works at Blue Origin. I was talking to Erica about why I was interested in physics, and she was like, "It sounds like you like physics because you want to build things." And I was like, "Oh, I don't really know about that." And she was like, "Haven't you done robotics for like 8 years?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess I built some things." And she was like, "You're kind of already an engineer." And I was like, "Oh." And that just clicked. And I think that's when I started basically seeing this as a field that I could be in, because I realized that it's something that I've been doing for a while.
That's awesome. I love to hear that kind of a story. It just clicking out of nowhere that what you've already been doing makes you what you want to be. So let's go towards the fellowship for a minute. When did you first hear about MIFP?
So my fellowship story, I think, is a little unique in that the fellowship found me. I didn't really find it. So I was, the beginning of junior year, I got an internship offer from SpaceX, and I was like, yeah. And so I like signed the offer. And then basically at the end of that school year, in around May, I think the current Isakowitz Fellow, who had been matched with SpaceX, she had some family stuff come up, so she had to drop out of the program. And so I think the Isakowitz Fellowship reached out to the SpaceX recruiters, and they were like, "Oh, like, who do you think from like your current intern batch like would be," because it was too late, I think, to do the whole application process from scratch at that point. And they were like, "Oh, like, who from your like current expected intern batch from the summer do you think would be a good candidate?" And they nominated me and a few other people. I wrote an essay. I think the prompt was like, "Why do you like space?" And so I basically copied and pasted my like personal statement for grad school. And I was like, "I don't really know what this is." And so I applied, and then I had an interview with Steve, and it went really well. And then afterwards, I became a part of the fellowship. So that's how I heard about it, to be honest.
That's really awesome. I know that all of us are lucky that you're part of our community. So I'm so glad that that happened fortuitously.
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, I'm really, really happy that it worked out that way.
Of course. And to follow up on that, I know that most of us who become fellows in this program, we start to think of it as this sort of second space family. Did you get that impression from the summit or before it? And how has the community been for you? What's it been like?
That's a great question. I think it definitely actually took like a little bit to get used to the fellowship as a concept, or like even like know how to navigate what it meant to be a part of it, just because it was something that like kind of came into my life. And so I think I thought of it as like a thing that was on my resume basically up until the summit. The summit, I think, was like a really perspective changing experience. I met all the other fellows in my class who I really adore, and our group chat continues to be one of like the highlights of things on my phone. And then I got to meet the Isakowitz family and was just like very overwhelmed by their kindness and their support. And then at the fellowship summit, there's a reception where you basically have dinner with your other fellows and everyone's mentors who are generally like executives at different aerospace companies. And so I started meeting really cool people there as well. That's actually how I got this internship. Buzz Aldrin was there, which is still wild to me. And that's I think when it started clicking to me that this was like a very profound and very incredible opportunity that I was in the middle of experiencing. And since then, I think the fellowship has been like a continual source of support for me, whether it's asking where to get a link for a live stream for like launches and stuff like that, to even more profound questions of like, what is this company like? How do I apply to this job? Like, what does it mean to build out a resume? And even just like Steve personally, like Steve Isakowitz has been like a phenomenal mentor to me in that I've been through a lot of like changing interests over this year, and I basically have been planning out a gap year for myself since maybe last October. And Steve has been a really big part of like helping me figure out what it means to leverage that time to develop myself into the person that I want to become.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the really nice things about this program. It's not very limited to one topic. There's engineers and scientists and business majors, anyone who cares about the future of space. And because of that, I know for me at least, within my class and at our summit, it was just such an insane and incredible experience that I had never felt anything like it before.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I feel too. It's one of a kind, out of this world. Insert space analogy here, but it's
Yes.
really extraordinary.
Every space pun is necessary to describe it, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So, what was working at SpaceX like that summer? What did you do? What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I think it was an incredible opportunity. I am so grateful that I got to work there. I worked specifically on a valve that was in the abort engine for Crew Dragon. So that was really fun. I had never worked, I didn't really know what a valve was before this internship. And so I thought it was just like a lot of firsts for me. It was my first job, like my first professional job in space. It was my first time seeing a valve. It was my first time learning what a seal was. Just like a bunch of things like that. And working on Crew Dragon that summer was really exciting. There was so much going on. The astronauts' desks were right next to mine, which was wild. I got to say hi to them. I got to, like, it was really exhilarating to like be able to do something that was so impactful. And I loved the people I worked with. I loved what I worked on, and I'm very grateful that that was an experience that I had.
That's awesome. So now you're at ABL Space Systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
ABL is another rocket launch provider for those who don't know, and they actually had some pretty exciting news as of yesterday, I think, publicly.
As of yesterday.
Do you want to tell everyone about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the press releases are probably like the most accurate and full picture of the news, but I think ABL has been doing really great work for a really long time, and I think one of their strategies has been to like build like a phenomenal product. And I think yesterday was like the first big wave of press releases sharing what they've done, sharing what they plan on doing, sharing things about the company and about the engine, the whole system. And so that was, yeah. And they also rolled out a new website, which I think is really beautiful. So, yeah.
Yeah, I actually went on the website this morning. I did not know it was new, and I was so impressed by it. The sleek coloring and the roll through. I would recommend that anyone who's interested in launch providers go check this out. It was a work of art.
It's super cool. I also, something that I really loved is that ABL isn't like a big company. I think right now they're in the 70s. I don't actually have the exact number. But something that I think is really neat is if you go on like the people page, like basically everyone but interns is on there, which I think is wonderful that they like can showcase every person and talk about every person. And I think I know it's very touching. Like a lot of my friends work full time at ABL. And so to be able to go through and be like, oh, like that's Eva, that's Sailor, is really nice.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what is it like to work there? And what are some of the other benefits of this small company environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a phenomenal experience. I had heard about this company through one of my really good friends from school, Sailor, who's a propulsion engineer at ABL. She was an intern last summer, and she and I would get lunch because we were both in LA. And lunch actually was more brunch, honestly. And she would just talk about how much she loved where she worked and how exciting what they were doing was. And I was like, oh, but like, what is it? And she was like, oh, sorry, I can't get into details, but I'm like so happy. And that's a pretty glowing review. So when I was at the fellowship reception that summer, I ran into Dan, who's the CFO and co-founder of ABL. And I think I more or less said, hey, I would love a tour. Here's my email. And he was like, okay. And then the next morning, I like kind of forgot about this interaction. The next morning, I logged into my email and I had an email from Dan being like, hey, send me your resume. Let's talk. And so I sent him my resume. He connected me with a few other engineers at ABL he was like, these people seem to be doing things that it sounds like you're excited by. I got to know them and now I'm here. So something that I think is really cool is that I feel like the company, because it's small, I, even as an intern, have a lot of like insight and understanding from like a systems perspective of like what all the different components of the rockets are, how do they integrate, why are those choices made, like, and if I ever have a question about something that I've been really enjoying doing is just like putting my mask on and like rolling 50 feet over to the person's desk and being like, hey, can you tell me more about X? And ABL as a company, I think really like prioritizes learning and people who love learning. And so it's really exciting to be able to like roll over and be like, hey, like I don't understand X, or I'm curious about X. And they explained it to me. And so I've really enjoyed it as like an educational opportunity as well as a professional experience.
That's really cool. So are you allowed to tell us about what you're working on there, or is that under the same thing as your friends?
I think I can tell you a little bit. So I'm working on an analytical tool to like model the pressurization system. And it's really exciting to me because I personally really like thermofluids and propulsion. And I'm also really interested in control. So working on like a tool that is kind of an interface between the two allows me to like leverage these two things that I really like and like get better at both of them.
That's awesome. Is that what you're doing for your master's graduate degree at Stanford?
Yeah, sort of. So Stanford doesn't really like ask you to focus on like a track or anything in your aerospace like master's degree. Instead, you have like 5 fundamental classes, then you should take a few math classes, and then there's just like, here's 9 technical electives. They have to be in the School of Engineering. Good luck. Which is basically why I really wanted to do it. So I did my undergrad in ME and CS, and I really wasn't sure which side of that I wanted to be on. Stanford's Astra graduate department is like really, really, really good at like robotics and controls. And the graduate ME department is really good at propulsion and thermofluids. And there's obviously a lot of really good propulsion work in the AA department as well. And so how flexible and freeing those requirements were means that I can take basically any amount of classes in any of those. I'm planning on taking like a finance and venture capital class at some point because I think that's neat and something that's worth learning. I'm taking like a double E class on optimization because I think that's much easier to learn in class than it is to like learn at like a really rigorous level at work. And so I'd love to be able to like absorb that in like a classroom setting. And so I don't really have a focus. That's part of why I'm taking the gap year, is like to get a variety of different experiences. And I'm actually not sure if you know about this. So I really wanted to get a pilot's license, and those are expensive. And so I really wanted to be able to afford a pilot's license. I was like, oh, like I should work, earn some money, and then, shell out like 15 grand or at least towards this pilot's license. And so I thought that was a great opportunity for me to try out a few different aerospace companies. And because like my master's is abbreviated because I did a lot of that coursework in undergrad, I felt like I had like the time and wasn't really worried about like losing out on a year of income before retirement or anything. And so right now I'm at ABL. In the fall, I'll be at Blue Origin. In the spring, I'm currently applying to work in policy at a few different places. After that, I think I'm going to try venture capital. We'll see how that goes. And then after that, I'm planning on pursuing the pilot's license. And I've wanted to write a children's book forever, so I might do that then too.
Okay, so you're going to be all around a Renaissance woman and do a little bit of everything this year.
Yeah, my advisor at school, he loves calling it my sabbatical, which I think is like a very dignified term, which for what is honestly just a lot of indecisiveness. So
I mean, sometimes that indecisiveness, it isn't all indecisiveness. We're trying things to figure out how to fit all of them together into our future career.
Yeah, I like that spin. I'll go with that.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think I was listening to something on NPR this morning about the rocket years and how to connect all your ideas. I mainly liked it because they called your 20s the rocket years, and that's what I think most of us want them to be. Yeah, so that's
what the satellite years are.
I know, right? That'll have to be, I guess, for next week's podcast listening.
Yeah,
that is so cool. I'm so interested in this gap year you're taking and how you're managing to fit so many different things in. I'm also working on a pilot's license, and I had never considered that solution as a way to finish it. It's extremely creative.
Thank you. I think I basically hit a point with school where I loved my undergraduate education. I just think it can be a little burning out. And so I really wanted to do something different for myself. So actually the first leg of the gap year was to go traveling for a month, but that didn't really happen. And so I got a few herb plants and I drove out to Reno to visit a friend, and that was my travel. It was super fun, but definitely not Thailand.
Yeah, definitely not. So I actually wanted to redirect us for some of our last few minutes because I want to get your perspective as someone who has bounced around the launch provider sphere, arena, whatever we want to call it. A lot of people didn't know that launch providing was a thing until SpaceX got really famous just a few years ago. People outside of engineering just weren't so aware. And so now to all of those people, it must look like the market is just getting saturated and a million companies are popping up because they haven't seen the background that's gone into it for so long. As it becomes more saturated, do you think that you can give them any insight into what it might look like when there are so many different alternatives?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to reframe that question a little bit. So I think it's important to note that I don't really think we're actually that close to market saturation. So right now, the things that get launched are largely by either universities with money, like Stanford, or companies with money. And generally, launch is basically hinged on being able to put a lot of money down for something that can get delayed a lot. So you require a lot of patience and a lot of flexibility as a business or a university to do it. You rely on pretty limited time slots and locations in which you can launch. And so as a result, like the the amount of things you can actually put in space, like the consumers who could do that are at the moment like fairly constrained. However, I think that as more launch providers enter the market and as there are more opportunities for launch, and a lot of these companies are basically hinging on the goal of making access to launch as cheap and affordable and flexible as possible. So at that point, the number of things you can put in space grows significantly. Like if you drop the cost to put something in orbit, all of a sudden, building a satellite is like a realistic project a high schooler could do, or a high school robotics team could do. Or one of my favorites is there's a company, I don't really remember the name, but they're trying to do these like on-demand meteor showers with like a constellation of satellites where they basically just like, it's like a little wasteful. I'm so fireworks, but like basically they just like deorbit them at a certain time and it looks like meteors. So for example, like if you were having like a birthday or something, like instead of doing fireworks, which are so 2008, you could do a meteor shower. Like that's crazy that that's like a thing that could be even conceived of. And that's almost entirely reliant on the fact that as more launch providers enter the market, launch becomes cheaper and like a thing that we can do. It's just democratizing what it means to put something in space.
That's awesome. And that's a really helpful perspective, I think, for anyone who's not in that niche field and doesn't know what it might be like. So, besides meteor showers, what technologies do you want to see come up?
I think something that really excites me about space is that everyone looks up, and there are so many impactful things you can do with an aerospace platform that it's so unfortunate to me that those opportunities are largely limited to people who happen to have the privilege, the exposure, and the financial resources to actually access space or access careers in space. And I think, as I was saying, like basically relating to what I was saying earlier, like as those things become like more broad and like more mainstream, once we start thinking of like, I don't know, like a launch provider as like basically like a really fancy and very high temperature bus company instead of like this crazy like, oh, rocket science thing, we start getting to a place where the end goal is to democratize space, but you can't really do that without increasing educational opportunities, without increasing like accessibility, without increasing like all the support resources that go into being able to launch rapidly and in high quantity. So something that excites me are initiatives to like basically make aerospace open source, or initiatives to handle like the support logistics for a country or a world that's so globally committed to putting things in space. So like, what does it mean to handle orbital debris? What does it mean to have like a package for a CubeSat? What does it mean to go about doing any of those things? And how do you make that information and those means as accessible as possible? That's like the technology that I think coming next.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. So, for people like you and me and all of the other fellows in this program, what role do you think our generation is going to have in the future of commercial space and new space?
A great question. One that I think about all the time. So I think it really hinges on two things. One, I think it's really important that our generation and NewSpace as a whole really challenge what we think is possible. As you're aware, aerospace really relies on what's been done before because it can be such a risky and expensive business. And so flight heritage is a really important concept, but sometimes I think it's worth thinking outside the box. And as launch becomes cheaper, that's something you can afford to test new and crazy things. Like for example, ABL is working on like an aerospike engine, which no one's really ever commercially done, which I think is awesome. So to challenge what you think is possible, challenge what it means to build a satellite, what it means to what a launch vehicle even is supposed to look like. And secondly, I think the other role that we are like our generation specifically have, and future older generations as well, I think should also take on this mantle, is to really fight to create an industry that reflects the best of us and the best of our values. As I'm sure you're aware, aerospace is not a particularly diverse field. And I think something that's really important to us is that a lot of change and innovation comes from having a variety of perspectives and a variety of voices in the room and a larger number of seats at the table. And I think that's something that we specifically can have like a very large impact on, is like shaping what it means to build a future. And it's really important to consider who is building the future and who benefits from that future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that was a very kind way that you put that, to say the least.
Yeah.
Okay, so a question that I really wanted to end quite a few of these conversations with, because I think it matters now more than ever. And I know it's certainly one that we've all been having behind closed doors. Given all of the blank happening in the world right now, fill in the blank with whatever you would like. How can we justify the time and the resources and everything else associated with space? Why is it worth it now during all of this?
Yeah, that's a big question, and one that I've been reckoning with a lot. I wish I started thinking about it more seriously earlier, but I think it was an especially shocking comparison, or a shocking weekend, like the weekend that Crew Dragon launched. That was something that was really exciting for me personally, having worked on it. And I think like globally, it was like a huge event, that it was like the first time that we had launched American astronauts from American soil on an American rocket in a really long time. But it was also the same weekend that the Black Lives Matter movement really started picking up even more steam than it already had. And I think the nation started its reckoning that I hope to see continue going forward. And so I think it's really, I think it's really important to specify what those, given all of the what those blanks mean. And I think it's worth naming and acknowledging each of the different things that affect us. And it's also sort of a privilege to not have to name that blank, I think. And secondly, I think it's really important to consider that space, historically and in the future, has never really been just about space. In a lot of ways, space can and does occupy the national conscious and the global conscious now. Building things that everyone watches gives us in aerospace a really unique and incredible opportunity to incorporate the change that we want to see reflected in the rest of the world. Furthermore, I think it's really important that we continue to expand what activism means. So I think, for example, protests and rallies and petitions are all incredible and very meaningful ways to impact change. But I think it's also really worth fundamentally reevaluating the way that we hire, promote, and retain candidates from underserved backgrounds, the way that we treat healthcare for our employees, the way that we build a product that reflects the best interests of everyone and not just those who can afford it. And I think those are all things we can continue to do in our daily lives to reflect the kind of change we really want to see in aerospace in a way that's more expansive than I think the traditional definition of activism.
That was really beautifully put. And I have to say, despite everything, I am very proud that so many people affiliated with this fellowship I have seen taking their time to post, or if they have the energy to educate, and if not, to take the time to self-educate and to learn. And I think everyone that I have connected with through it has just been doing a really beautiful job. And it inspires me to know that they're not just brilliant engineers, but that they really are living up to the ethics of the future of humanity. I think it's very beautiful. So we're running just a few minutes over, and it's getting very late for some people who are tuning in. So let's close up. Commercial space changes literally every day, and because it is so rapid, it is very hard for people who aren't already in the center of it to stay in the know and to stay involved. How do you recommend that people should try to stay informed and as up to date as they can?
Ooh, that's a spicy question. I think for me personally, I'm actually not perhaps as good at staying informed as I should be. I think Josh, you're watching. Josh is actually probably how I get the majority of my news, so thank you.
Ingersoll, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Shout out to Josh Ingersoll. He's fantastic.
But I don't know, I think it's definitely worthwhile to like stay in the know and stay hip did I just age myself? To stay hip with what's new and happening in aerospace, especially because right now, like so many crazy and exciting developments are happening. But I think not being in the know doesn't mean that you don't deserve a seat at the table. And I think that it's sometimes for a lot of people, like due to life circumstances or whatever, it is kind of hard to like stay up to date on all of these different companies, everything they're doing, all the policy changes that are involved, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that just if you feel like you're not in the know, that doesn't mean that you don't deserve to be, and that doesn't mean that you don't deserve to be a part of creating what ends up on Space News.
Amazing. Yeah, I agree. And I appreciate that shout out. Hopefully we just sent a few thousand new followers over to Josh and he'll become the space journalist we've always wanted.
I think he'd like that.
Yeah, no, I think he would.
He's not busy pursuing his like new master's degree.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Have a great evening. To follow Anjali for even more space news and puppy pictures, you can find her on Instagram at Anjali in Space. I'll put that up on the screen for you, or on LinkedIn. If you would like to learn more about this fellowship program, the applications will open at the beginning of the fall if you're a student, and otherwise you can learn more at our website at MatthewIsakowitzFellowship.org or on social medias at Matt Fellowship. We would love to have a conversation and to continue to interact with you more. Thank you all so much for joining us for episode 2. Have a nice night.